Welcome to the Wellfuel podcast, your spot for everything gut health, detox, hormones, a healthy home, mold, and everything in between. I'm your host, Isabel Smith. I'm an integrative and functional registered dietitian and the founder of Isabel Smith Nutrition. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Wellfuel podcast. I'm so happy to have my friend, Michelle Shapiro, here. She and I don't get to spend enough time together, so we just almost ran out of all of our time talking offline. But I'm so excited because we're going to have a great conversation about POTS and histamine and all these things that both of us are getting so many questions about these days. So who is Michelle? Michelle Shapiro is an integrative functional registered dietitian in New York City who's helped over 1,000 clients reverse their anxiety, heal longstanding gut and immune issues, and approach their weight in a loving way. Michelle has a virtual practice of 5 nutritionists where she and her team work one-on-one towards these goals. She's the host of Quiet the Diet podcast. If you guys haven't listened, you must, where she helps listeners bridge the gap between body positivity and functional nutrition. Michelle, welcome. So happy to have you.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe it took us so long to do this. We've been recording stuff and creating together for a very long time, but I'm so happy to be here, Isabel, and to hang with you, of course.
So fun. It's like such a good excuse to get together and hang. And this was actually the reason that I launched the podcast in the first place. Maybe one of the reasons you did also.
100%.
So that we could like make an appointment to sit in the same room and chat.
Exactly.
So one of the things that you and I both do a lot of, and you and I have been talking in DMs and voice memos and phone calls for years, is about this histamine crisis that I feel like has just raged so much more in the last couple of years. But you and I were talking about this 5 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost like we were spiritually prepping for what was about to happen because of COVID and potentially the vaccines causing some reactions in people. But we were both what I would call like OG histamine people, where we've had either mast cell, POTS, hypermobility, that triad forever, it seems like.
Ever.
Yeah.
Forever. Remember when I launched that course 6 years ago and I was like, it's the histamine. What was that? It was like, I forget what it was even called, but histamine solution. And people were like, what's histamine? And you and I were like, yay, this will be great. And you were like, we both were like, nobody's biting.
No one knows what it is. And still I think it's really confusing given what people are seeing online about histamines and what people are seeing online about POTS. I know POTS has had its moment on TikTok recently even, and I think it's still really confusing to people.
Yeah. So do you just want to you and I should talk about what exactly are histamines? I know our audience is super well-versed, but I think everybody needs a refresher.
100%. Yeah. So we have these highly intelligent immune cells in our body called mast cells, which I'm sure people have heard of this condition, MCAS. If you've been on Isabel's page, which you have, if you're here, you will have seen this many, many times. Mast cells are these cells that are kind of like the guard, the watchman on the tower of our body. And they are always assessing for threat, essentially. What they have inside of them is these little sacs of different chemicals. So when something attaches to the outside of a mast cell, histamines are sent out to do a couple really important immune tasks to help us send a message to the rest of the body. There's danger coming. Please open up those blood vessels so we can send immune cells and resources and nutrients through really efficiently. Histamines have many, many functions, and those mast cells actually have thousands of chemicals they send out. But we tend to get the most symptoms from histamines, honestly, in excess.
And that's, I think, the key too, is in excess, right? And I say this to clients all the time, like they're not bad unless you have too much.
100%. Yeah, it's too much or your body's too sensitive to it or they're in circulation hanging out for too long.
Yeah, because we all have them and they all are like in every part of our body's function, digestion, all the rest of it every day. But you and I don't see people who don't have like histamine. We have, of course, there are other problems people come with us too, but if they're talking about histamine with us, it's because they are having feelings from them, not because their histamine watch guards are quiet. So what are some things that, and this is just a refresher for everybody listening, like what are some things that'll push on the mast cells?
Yeah, so it could be anything from a mental stressor or a physical stressor. So it can be toxins, it can be vibrations that are uncomfortable. I would say it's almost like having mast cell activation syndrome is like having an allergy to stress. So it's basically that when your body experiences any transition, any change, any fight, any strong detox process even, your body is going to create a grander reaction to those things. So it really can be environmental toxins. It can be I'm telling you, a bad smell. It could be you're sitting on an airplane and there's weird lighting, weird air, and you're vibrating underneath. It can be that you went on a detox protocol, like a mold or a parasite protocol, and your body is like, what the heck was that? I did not like that. It can produce a histamine reaction to that. So it really can come from any strong or quick change. And then temperature changes are also very triggering for histamines as well.
Yeah. And usually a person who has like a one time or like an occasional histamine thing won't necessarily be like waving the flag, but it's when this starts to happen like over like multiple repeated occasions, right? And then, you know, as with all things, things brew in the background, we ignore them, and then boom, we can't ignore them. And then we're like, oh my God, I am dying.
Exactly.
But these kinds of things, like Michelle was talking about, you could be having more of these episodes. And we're seeing this a lot in a post-COVID environment. You know, we're seeing this a lot now, more than ever. I'm so grateful that I personally experienced them. I know you probably feel the same way, because I feel like I can sit on the other end and be like, no, I actually know how you feel, which I think is a superpower, actually. But I feel grateful that like I know about them, because I think it's been an explosion. It's going to continue to be an explosion. You know, something I see a lot for folks is this toxicity piece, is this, you know, gut parasite, Lyme co-infection, Bartonella babesia. You know, nothing pushes on the mast cells like a toxicity situation, and nothing pushes on the mast cells like stealth infection. So I always find when people come along with histamine stuff, I'm like, what's the underlying infectious situation or toxicity situation?
Yeah, here's the tricky part with that you know very well, Isabel, is that our mast cells will prevent you from treating that because they will get so scared and instigated. So what I'm seeing is a lot of people who are damaged from functional medicine doctors and functional medicine nutritionists, to be honest with you. So they're coming to me saying, I went on this cell core, sorry to say, like, not that I love Cellcore products, but like this is the reality of it. Like they're going on like an intense binder, intense kill protocol, and they are having such severe issues. Now, I want to be clear about something. When it comes to histamine symptoms, from a quality of life perspective, it could be so dampening to your quality of life. The depression, anxiety, insomnia alone from histamine issues can really feel like an out-of-body experience, and is some of the worst symptoms that any of my clients have experienced, even if they've never experienced them before. Isabel, we were messaging each other 6 years ago, 4 years ago, both of us saying to each other, are we going freaking nuts, when we both had these moldy environments? Yeah, exactly. We were like, what is going on with our bodies? And we knew it. We even knew what was going on, and we had all the knowledge, and it's still so confusing how this little tiny messenger can wreak so much havoc. So if you're approaching a detox protocol, you have to work with a provider like you, because you understand how strong their detox and overall nutrient reserves and just nervous system has to be before you start killing stuff.
Yeah, you can't hop into, and you and I could have a whole separate side conversation about stupid protocols that people put people on and then don't monitor appropriately, right? Like, go try XYZ protocol and call me in 6 months and let me know how you are. These people die because their bodies are so inflamed already and their pathways aren't open, and you have to do things in a very particular order. Otherwise, you end up in a messy situation, which leads us nicely into this POTS conversation. So, that's the way.
Perfect. Love it.
So, one of the things that can come up is like a POTS-y-like situation for people who are truly in a histamine mess. You know, it's really a histamine mess that can create issues like POTS. I feel like people are seeing it on TikTok. I'm getting a lot of TikTok, is you and I could also have a separate side conversation about all the things on TikTok. I think the awareness is really nice when things come up like that on TikTok, but I think, as always, we need to be aware of who's the messenger and what the message is and what the solution is that's provided or not provided on something like TikTok.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
But Michelle, you and I were talking about like, what is POTS and how does that come about in this situation?
Yeah, so POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Essentially, you're going from sitting to standing and your heart rate is going wild. Symptoms of POTS would be like people who are standing in the shower and then they get really dizzy and they get redness in their legs and they Might feel like in the morning, again, they notice their heart rate's very erratic, a lot of dizziness, a lot of body pain. And really what's happening in this process is if you're in something like a shower, showering causes something called vasodilation, which is essential to this conversation. Vasodilation is when your blood vessels open up.
Yes.
Here's the problem. If our blood vessels are constantly open or heat makes them more open and we're standing, there's no pump getting it back up to our heart and brain, which means that all of the blood is going to drop down to our feet. And that's why your brain feels like, oh my gosh, it's an emergency. So what your heart does is it actually pumps really hard to get the blood back up to your heart. So what people see is dizziness from the low blood flow, and then they see really rapid heart rate that scares the crap out of them. The reason why POTS and MCAS are so frightening for people, Isabel, is because the symptoms are vital signs. So your vital signs, you could get fevers from MCAS, from POTS, you can get heart rate changes. And so people feel like, oh my gosh, since these are organ issues that are vital sign related, this is really scary. So I think it really frightens people. The kind of hypothesis that you and I have built is that a lot of people are getting treated for POTS in these clinics. And what the treatment is for POTS is usually increase your salt a lot, because salt will cause vasoconstriction, right? It'll cause your blood to pump better and it'll fill up your blood volume. What everyone's missing in these clinics, in my opinion, is that, well, why is your vessel constantly vasodilating? And the answer comes from no other than histamine. Histamine is a potent vasodilator. So if you constantly have histamines pumping out, your blood vessels are going to keep being open and you won't get that juicy blood flow back up to your heart and back up to your gut.
And thank you, because I think that that's such an important, drawing the relationship between the two is so important, because I think for these people who are scared, there is no ability to connect that relationship. And I see it with a lot of my clients who come with POTS. They're like, I'm stuck with POTS. This is just the way it is. And this is the way it's going to be. And I'm like, always, I'm like, no.
Well, it's a syndrome. That's the first thing I say to people. It's a syndrome. It's not a root cause. There are some practitioners who will say it's incurable or lifelong, but it is a syndrome. And we have to remember that syndromes are not intended to be the same throughout time. They're intended to change over time.
That's so good. I often find that people are like, I have a new diagnosis. And I'm like, is it though? I'm like, right. If it's a syndrome, I think it's so important that we remind everybody it's a syndrome. So, which means comes and goes, right? And it's something like anything else that comes and goes if we figure out what's behind the scenes. I am also finding that there can often be digestive stuff that goes with POTS, and it's not often talked about. TikTok has been talking about it, but it's not often talked about. So like I have a person I'm thinking about, and she's actually a medical provider. And I said to her, I think this might be, this might be happening. And she's like, but I don't have the rest of the symptoms. And I'm like, but you do actually. But, but because we're so, trained to think about it as just the heart racing, the blood pressure thing, but there can be a lot of digestive stuff related to a POTS situation, mostly diarrhea, I find.
Yeah. So, and again, I think it's hard because we can have MCAS and POTS and hypermobility happening at the same time. Usually if someone has POTS and MCAS, they're also going to have hypermobility, which is when depending on the definition, if you're looking at it from a heads or eds perspective, Ehlers-Danlos perspective, genetically or not, it's that you have, I think it's 5 or more joints are hypermobile, or basically it's like calling it like you have loose joints, let's call it. So what happens a lot of the time is that all of the connective tissue of your body, all 3 of these conditions are related to connective tissue, lines the blood vessels and the joints of your body. So what do we think connects our gut to the rest of us, right? It's still these pieces of connective tissue, lines everything. So it'll affect whether our gut's pumping. And there's a very distinct and specific relationship between acid reflux and histamines as well. The more acid that's produced, the more histamines produced. The more histamines produced, they have a bidirectional relationship. So because these are all connective tissue disorders, you're going to see symptoms in every single part of your body, because there's connective tissue that lines all of the vessels and joints and everything in our whole body, basically.
Everything. And I say to people all the time with this mast cell histamine, I'm like, this is a systemic inflammatory
Exactly.
reaction. However, 95% of the time, the blood work is perfect.
Yeah, this is one of the, like, I would call final bosses of functional nutrition and functional medicine, because it's the most symptomatic that I've
Yeah,
seen, like versus a Hashimoto's even, these
right.
symptoms are roaring because they're like survival symptoms, right? These are really intense symptoms and they never show up on lab tests. Like there's nothing of them that can show up on a lab test. What these conditions are diagnosed by is actually either by exclusion, by symptoms. There's some tests for histamine stuff. They're very weak correlation. And most people are on antihistamines anyway, so you can't even run those labs without going off of them. POTS is diagnosed by a tilt table test, which is they basically lay you down and pick you up and see how much your heart rate. It has to be 30 beats different, basically, from laying to standing. But that doesn't tell you anything about why that happened in the first place. It doesn't tell you anything about the root cause. And the fix for it is always a Band-Aid approach. How do we just get blood pumping again, essentially? But with hypermobility, POTS, and MCAS, leaky blood vessels, because of the poor connective tissue, is also a huge part of it. So leaky gut is also a part of it. We have connective tissue lining our entire gut. So you're going to have, again, those symptoms everywhere. And you're 100% right. You just have to find like leaky gut. You have to hunt for the conditions through the damage that it's caused, as opposed to through lab testing for these conditions.
And again, exactly. And again, by the time you're symptomatic, this has been going on and building. Our bodies try incredibly hard to be tolerant and, all the things. And then finally the body goes, I'm done. Like, I am so tired. I've been working really hard to try and keep everything together because the body's really good at trying to keep us alive. And then the immune system just gets exhausted. So think about, how long you've actually had your symptoms. And, it's a long time longer than what you've been experiencing that this has been building in the background, years and
100%.
years.
Yeah, there's what I think of as MCAS and POTS is we always use this analogy in functional nutrition, the bucket being filled, right? So it's like once you hit that point, you enter of overall stress, overall untreated infections, overall everything, you hit that point, and then you're creating basically a new set of conditions, which is this cycle of nervous system involvement, immune involvement. It's called like our endoneuroimmune axis eventually, where now there's like, you almost have a new problem, which is a reaction to the old problems. And then you have to deal with this problem first before you can deal with the old problems, essentially, which makes it very complicated. And I think why a lot of functional medicine docs really are not treating these conditions well is because they're like, let's treat the mold. And I'm like, no, you have to deal with the reaction to the mold first now, because that's where the symptoms really come from, is from these histamines and things like that.
Yeah. And, the other thing I think too to remember is that like people get frustrated, right? They're like, when can you give me a timeline? And I'm like, haha. I literally go, haha. I'm like, I'm 6 years in and here we are. I just took my antibiotics. I have to take them that's what I was taking. I was taking my antibiotics for Lyme. I'm 6 years in. It's like this, because this took a long time to build in the background, you should expect we deal with one infection, we deal with one issue. There's going to be other ones that pop up behind it, but you're going to feel better as you go, and as each one moves, and as everything, your immune system comes back online, you will feel better. 100%. And the things will all become less intense. So,
and you can treat the symptoms along the way. You don't have to suffer the whole way. You can work with the symptoms. It can feel, honestly, Isabel, you and I went through it. It feels like torture. I don't know what other word to use for it, but it really doesn't have to, because you really can work with the symptoms. You don't have to treat the root cause and ignore how you're feeling on a daily basis. You can do both at the same time.
You can do both. And I think there's a lot of merit in doing both and being, but not being satisfied with, I am now symptom free, but I really just haven't done the actual work, because you'll end up continuing to come back. And the symptoms, by the way, it'll probably get more intense and worse over time if you don't do the digging. So,
Agreed.
If you're out there and you're listening, what we're recommending to you is work with somebody who can help you get to the root cause. It will be an investment. It will be time spent, but it'll be something that will actually move the needle
100%.
and help you move forward in your life, because I don't know about you guys, but life is really short and our minutes are limited. So I want to have fun and feel good in my body. So, I think the perspective of, even though the work is hard, where I'm going as long as you have a provider who can help you get there, which is really the key here. This is not a DIY experience in any fashion.
No, we couldn't even find at the time, before 6 years ago when we were going through this, we couldn't even find providers who did it, let alone us doing it ourselves. I will say this, Isabel, and you know this is true too, that while the providers, we are amazing guides and we have a great understanding of these conditions, and we can say, oh, I have 100 clients who went through the same exact symptom. You're not alone. Nothing scary is happening. This is all part of it. It's expected. If with all these conditions, it has to come down to the person. Because these are conditions of the nervous system, you have to have, it's so corny, but you have to have hope, and you have to be pretty relentless in believing that you're going to get better. Because Isabel, I know you, you know me. There have been moments even with us where we were like, are we going to make it through this? Because it got really bad at some points. And now I'm so hopeful that everyone can, that I can say with certainty, things can always get better. Absolutely. I know they can.
1,000%. And that is the best segue, because you and I are going to go and record another podcast right now about your body and talking to your body and being in your body and not restricting your eating when you feel like your body size is larger in the healing process. Look at that.
Exactly.
So where can we find you? Where can they listen and see you and do all the things?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram, Michelle Shapiro RD. I have a podcast, Quiet the Diet. And then I am so excited to say that all this juicy information will be available in this incredible new offering I have, which is really an education center for everything histamine. So it's called the Highly Sensitive Body Hub, which is basically just people who are experiencing what I would call like highly sensitive body symptoms, which means your body's operating the opposite of how other people's body's operating. And it's just a 6 months complete access to any piece of education and information on this. Isabel, I'm going to ask you to be a guest expert in there too, by the way. And you can find me, and I work with clients one-on-one, and my team does. Yes.
Amazing. We love that. Well, thanks guys for tuning in. Hopefully this was insightful for you, and Michelle and I are going to go and record another juicy one that you guys won't want to miss. So we'll see you guys next time on the Wellfuel podcast. As always, thanks so much for listening to the Wellfuel podcast. We're so happy to have you. To make sure you don't miss a beat, please subscribe either on Apple or Spotify, because we have episodes dropping once or more a week with tons of great content. If you want to make sure that you're up to date on everything we're doing in the business with our clients and new offers and all the things, make sure that you check us out at Isabel Smith Nutrition on Instagram and isabelsmithnutrition.com. See you guys soon.